"Clean that up." He didn't ask. He didn't apologize. He just pointed at the wine soaking through her shirt, while the entire table watched in silence. The wine glass tilted. For a moment, it seemed accidental, the kind of slip that happens when hands move too fast, when conversations overlap, when attention divides. But Brian's hand didn't shake. It poured, slowly, deliberately, the red liquid arcing through the air in a controlled stream, landing precisely on Alexis's white shirt as she stood beside the table, tray balanced against her hip, expression unchanged. No one moved. The 5 men seated around the table, investors, colleagues, men in tailored suits discussing quarterly projections, froze mid-sentence. Their eyes tracked the wine as it spread across her chest, dark and staining, but none of them spoke. The restaurant continued around them. Quiet conversations at distant tables, silverware against porcelain, someone laughing near the bar. But at this table, the silence was absolute. Brian set the glass down, adjusted his cufflinks, then he looked at her shirt, not at her face, at the stain. "Clean that up." He said it without looking at her eyes, without raising his voice, just pointed at the wine he'd poured, like she'd spilled it herself, like it was her responsibility to fix. The silence deepened. Alexis didn't flinch. She stood there, wine dripping down her torso, her face carefully neutral, not angry, not embarrassed, just waiting for him to realize what he'd done, waiting for someone to say something. But no one spoke. One of the men, silver-haired, wearing a wedding ring, cleared his throat. His mouth opened. He glanced at Brian, then at Alexis, then down at his hands. He said nothing. Another man shifted in his seat. The leather creaked. Still, no one intervened. Brian pulled his phone from his pocket, glanced at the screen, swiped once, scrolling through something that held more of his attention than the woman standing 3 feet away. "You weren't paying attention," he said, still not looking up. His tone was flat, corrective, the way someone might point out a missed decimal in a spreadsheet. Nothing personal, nothing cruel. Just feedback. He waved his hand, brief, dismissive. "Get someone else to finish the table." Not a request, just an expectation. Alexis's fingers tightened on the edge of the tray. Just once. Her knuckles whitened for half a second, then released. She inhaled. Slowly, quietly. Then she looked at him. Not at the table, not at the other men, not at the wine spreading across her shirt, at Brian. For exactly 2 seconds, her expression didn't change. No anger, no hurt, no accusation, just acknowledgement, like she was committing something to memory, like she was deciding something he couldn't see. Then she turned. She walked toward the kitchen, her steps measured, her posture straight, the tray still balanced perfectly against her hip. The wine continued to drip, small drops hitting the marble floor, leaving a faint trail. Near the bar, a young waiter had stopped mid-pour. He was staring at Alexis's back as she walked away. His hand hovered over a wine glass. Frozen. He saw it. He knew, and he didn't move either. Behind her, the table remained silent for 3 more seconds. Then one of the men said something about market volatility. His voice was quieter than before, almost apologetic. Another laughed. Softly, uncertainly, like he was trying to convince himself everything was fine. Brian picked up his phone again. Scrolled. Didn't look up. He didn't notice the way the silver-haired man was watching him now, not with judgment, not with disgust, with something closer to pity. The conversation resumed, quieter, fractured, hollow, but it resumed. And across the restaurant, Alexis pushed through the kitchen door. It swung shut behind her with a soft hiss. Inside, she set the tray down on the steel counter, slowly, carefully. Her hands were steady, her breathing was controlled. But when she looked down at her shirt, at the wine still spreading, still warm, still there, something shifted in her expression. Not tears, not rage, just clarity, like a decision had already been made. The kitchen was louder than the dining room. Steam rising from industrial dishwashers, pans clattering against steel, voices calling out orders in overlapping rhythms. Sharp, efficient, constant. Alexis stood at the sink in the back corner, away from the line, her shirt soaking in cold water. The wine was already set, the stain permanent, but she scrubbed it anyway. Her hands moved in slow, deliberate circles. She didn't look up when Marcus approached. He was the kitchen manager, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who'd seen everything, tolerated most of it, but even he hesitated before speaking. "You okay?" Alexis didn't stop scrubbing. "I'm fine." Her voice was even, calm, almost too calm. Marcus shifted his weight, glanced toward the door, then back at her. That was out of line. Alexis finally looked up. Her expression was unreadable. "He poured wine on me because I wasn't paying attention," she said. Flat, factual, like she was repeating something she'd been told. Marcus's jaw tightened. "If you want to file a complaint, I'll back you. We have cameras, witnesses." Alexis turned off the water, wrung out the shirt. The wine-stained water dripped into the sink, pink and diluted. "Witnesses," she repeated softly. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, the whole table saw it." Alexis folded the shirt carefully, set it on the counter. "And what did they do?" The question hung in the air. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. He had no answer, because they both knew they did nothing. Alexis reached for a clean shirt from her locker, pulled it on without a word, buttoned it slowly, her fingers steady. Marcus watched her, uncertain. "You don't have to go back out there. I can have someone else cover your section." Alexis tucked the shirt in, smoothed the fabric. "He asked for someone else to finish the table." "Exactly. So let me—" "No." The word was quiet, but absolute. Marcus blinked. Alexis turned to face him fully. Her expression was still controlled, but something in her eyes had shifted, something that hadn't been there before. "I'll finish my shift," not a request, a statement. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but if he says one more thing—" "He won't." She said it with complete certainty, like she knew something he didn't. Alexis walked back into the dining room 3 minutes later. Her hair was pulled back, her shirt was clean, her posture was perfect. She moved through the space with the same quiet efficiency as before, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, taking orders. She didn't look at Brian's table, not once, but she passed it twice. Both times, the conversation faltered. One of the men, younger, dark-haired, wearing rimless glasses, watched her walk by. His eyes followed her across the room. Then he looked at Brian. Brian was still on his phone, still scrolling, still entirely unbothered. The younger man frowned, said nothing. 15 minutes later, the table requested the check. Marcus brought it himself. He set the leather folder down in front of Brian without a word. His expression was professional, controlled, but his jaw was tight. Brian didn't notice. He glanced at the total, pulled out a black credit card, handed it back without looking up. "Thank you, sir," Marcus said. His tone was polite, formal, empty. Brian didn't respond. The table left 6 minutes later. They stood, adjusted their jackets, shook hands with quiet murmurs about following up Monday. Brian led the way toward the exit, phone still in hand, typing as he walked. The silver-haired man lingered. He turned back, looked across the restaurant. Alexis was at the far end, setting down drinks for another table. She moved with the same calm precision, the same controlled grace, like nothing had happened. The man watched her for 3 seconds, then he turned and followed the others out. The door closed behind them. The restaurant continued, and Alexis returned to the kitchen carrying an empty tray, her expression unchanged. But when she set it down on the counter, she stood there for a moment, just stood, her hands resting flat on the steel surface, her breathing slow and deliberate. Marcus approached again, quieter this time. "You sure you're okay?" Alexis didn't look at him. She looked at her hands, at the faint red stain still visible under her nails, no matter how much she'd scrubbed. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice was different now. Softer, colder, like something inside her had locked into place. "This is only the beginning. Subscribe now and stay with us until the end." Brian didn't think about the restaurant again until 2 days later. Monday morning, his office on the 43rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, everything precisely arranged, from the minimalist desk to the single orchid in a glass vase. He was reviewing quarterly reports when his assistant knocked. "Your 10 o'clock is here." Brian glanced at his calendar. The PR team. Routine. Send them in. 3 people entered. 2 he recognized. The third was new, younger, a woman with sharp eyes and a tablet already open in her hands. They sat. No pleasantries this time. "We have a problem," the lead strategist said. He pulled up a screen, turned it toward Brian. It was a video, short, less than 30 seconds. The angle was from across the restaurant, far enough that faces weren't perfectly clear, but close enough that the moment was unmistakable. Brian's hand, the wine glass, the deliberate pour. Alexis standing there, soaked, silent. The video had no sound, no caption, just the image, and beneath it, The number, 237,000 views. Brian stared at the screen. Where did this come from? Twitter. Saturday night. The younger woman swiped, showed him the comments. Thousands of them. Brian scanned the first few lines, then stopped. His expression didn't change. It's out of context. The lead strategist opened his mouth, closed it. The younger woman tilted her head slightly. Sir, what context would change this? The room went very still. Brian set the tablet down. No statement. The lead strategist leaned forward. Sir, if we don't... I said no statement. His voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen. It just stopped the conversation. The meeting ended 2 minutes later. By Tuesday afternoon, the view count had tripled. By Wednesday morning, it was trending. Brian's phone started ringing. Colleagues, board members, investors with careful, polite voices asking about the video. He gave the same answer every time. It's being handled. But by Thursday, someone had identified her. Not her full name, not her address, just her first name, the restaurant. And suddenly, the narrative wasn't his anymore. Thursday evening, Brian sat alone in his office, the city lights spreading out below him in perfect geometric rows. His assistant had left. The building was empty. He pulled up the video again, watched it once, the wine arcing through the air, her shirt darkening, the table frozen. He remembered the moment clearly. She'd been hovering. He'd been in the middle of something important. He'd corrected the situation, that was all. But watching it now, the way the wine hung in the air for half a second before it landed, the way her face stayed completely still, the way no one moved, it looked different, not wrong, just permanent. He closed the video, sat there in the silence. His email pinged. Subject urgent, board inquiry, viral incident. He stared at it for 10 seconds, then deleted it without opening. The drive home took 40 minutes. He didn't turn on the radio, didn't make calls, just drove. But his hands were tight on the wheel. For the first time in years, Brian felt something he couldn't categorize immediately. Not guilt, not regret, something smaller, doubt. Not about what he'd done, about whether it mattered what he'd done, because the version of events he remembered, the reasonable one, the justified one, wasn't the version people were seeing. And for someone who'd spent his entire life ensuring his version was the only one that existed, that gap felt like a crack in something structural, something that couldn't be resealed. He pulled into his driveway, turned off the engine, sat there in the dark, and for the first time he wondered if silence could be used against him the same way he'd always used it against others. Alexis saw the video on Friday morning. She was sitting in the break room before her shift, when a co-worker leaned over her shoulder. "That's you, isn't it?" Sarah was holding her phone. The screen showed the video, paused on the moment the wine hit. Alexis didn't react. "Yeah, that's me." Sarah sat down across from her, lowered her voice. "It's everywhere. I'm sorry." Alexis took a sip of her coffee. Lukewarm, bitter. "It already happened." Sarah hesitated. "Are you going to say something? Publicly?" Alexis set the cup down. The video had been shared thousands of times. Strangers were angry on her behalf, calling Brian names she wouldn't have used. Some calling for boycotts, but none of them knew what happened after. None of them had seen her walk back into that dining room. None of them had watched Brian leave without consequence. "No," Alexis said. "I'm not going to say anything." Sarah blinked. "Why not?" Alexis stared at the frozen image on the screen. At herself, standing there, soaked and silent. At Brian, his hand still raised, completely unbothered. "Because I don't need to. Not yet." The shift started like any other, but something was different now. People recognized her, not everyone, but enough. A woman at table 6 whispered to her companion, eyes flicking toward Alexis. A man at the bar stared too long before looking away. When Alexis refilled water at a table near the window, one of the guests, a younger woman with kind eyes, touched her arm gently. "I'm sorry that happened to you." Alexis paused, met her eyes. "Thank you." The woman leaned closer, quieter. "You should sue him. People like that never learn unless they're forced to." Alexis's smile didn't change, but something tightened in her chest. "I'll think about it." The woman nodded, satisfied, but after she turned away, Alexis stood there longer than necessary, staring at nothing, because everyone had an opinion about what she should do. Everyone had a plan for her justice, and none of them asked what she actually wanted. By mid-shift, Marcus pulled her aside. "The owner called this morning. Wants to talk to you Monday." Alexis's expression didn't change. "About what?" "About whether you want to press charges or make a statement. The restaurant's getting calls, reporters, Lawyers offering to represent you for free. He paused. They want to know if you're planning to take action. Alexis was quiet. What if I don't? Marcus frowned. What do you mean? What if I don't press charges? Don't make a statement? Don't do anything? Marcus looked uncomfortable. Then my people might think you're okay with what happened. Alexis met his eyes. Would you? Marcus didn't answer right away. Then he shook his head. No, but I'm not the one watching the video. Alexis nodded slowly, turned back toward the dining room. The weight settled back onto her shoulders, different than before, heavier. That evening, Alexis sat in her car in the parking lot. She didn't start the engine, just sat there. Her phone buzzed. A text from a friend. Saw the video. Are you all right? She typed back, I'm fine. Then she opened her browser, searched her name paired with the restaurant. The results loaded instantly. Billionaire caught on camera humiliating waitress. Viral video sparks debate about workplace dignity. Why hasn't she spoken out? That last one made her stop. She clicked it. The article was sympathetic, supportive, but the subtext was clear. Silence could be mistaken for acceptance. Inaction could be seen as weakness. If she didn't say something soon, the narrative would move on without her. Alexis closed the browser, sat there in the dim glow of her phone screen, and for the first time since the video went viral, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Not anger, not vindication, pressure, because everyone was watching Brian now. But they were also watching her, waiting for her to do something, say something, be something other than the silent woman in the video. And the longer she stayed quiet, the more people would assume she had nothing to say. Alexis started the car, pulled out of the parking lot, drove home with the windows up, the silence pressing against her ears. She'd thought the scales had shifted. She'd thought the weight had lifted. But sitting there in the dark, hands tight on the wheel, she realized something. The silence wasn't hers to control anymore. It belonged to everyone watching. And if she didn't break it soon, someone else would. Brian's Monday started with a call from his attorney. We need to talk. No greeting. Brian was in his home office. Coffee still hot, morning news playing silently. About what? The video. Whether she's planning to sue. Brian set his cup down. Has she? Not yet, but the longer this sits, what do you want me to do? A pause. Issue a statement. Acknowledge the incident. Express regret. Brian's jaw tightened. No. Brian, I said no. Silence on the other end. Then, the board's asking questions. The call ended. Brian sat there, opened his laptop, searched his own name. The results had multiplied. By Tuesday, 2 board members had called. Polite voices, careful words. Just checking in. Wanted to see how you're handling things. Perception matters, you know. Brian gave the same answer. It's being handled. But Wednesday morning, an email arrived from the CFO. Subject urgent. Investor inquiry. 3 major investors reached out. They want assurance. Call me. Brian stared at it, then deleted it. The inbox went empty. He didn't move for a full minute. Thursday evening, Brian went back to the restaurant. He didn't plan it, didn't decide. He just drove there, sat near the window, alone, ordered something he didn't want. The dining room was quieter than he remembered. Scattered tables, low voices, silverware on porcelain. The staff moved through the space. None of them looked at him. The host had seated him without eye contact. His server took the order without lingering. The busboy refilled water and disappeared, like he wasn't there, or like noticing him would cost something. Then he saw her. Alexis emerged from the kitchen, tray balanced, posture straight. She moved through the room with the same efficiency as always, refilling, clearing, smiling at guests. She didn't look toward his table, not once, but her path curved around him, deliberately, widely, like he was something to navigate around. He watched her pause at another table, laugh softly at something a guest said, watched her write down an order with the same careful attention. She looked fine, unbothered, whole, and he was the one sitting alone in the corner of the room where it happened. His server returned, set down the drink. Anything else, sir? Brian looked up at him, young, mid-20s, tense. Is she working tonight? The server blinked. I'm sorry, Alexis. The server's face went neutral. Yes, sir. Could you ask her to come over? Silence. Sir, she's assigned to a different section. I know. The server didn't move, then nodded once. I'll ask. He crossed the room, spoke to Alexis near the kitchen. Brian watched. Alexis glanced toward his table, just once. Her face didn't change. She said something, shook her head, walked into the kitchen. The door swung shut behind her. The server returned alone. She's occupied, sir. Brian stared at him. The server held his gaze, didn't apologize again, didn't explain, just stood there. And Brian understood. The transaction he'd built his life on, Speak, expect, receive didn't exist here anymore. Not with her, not with any of them. He'd lost something he didn't know could be lost. Brian left 20 minutes later. Didn't finish the drink, didn't ask for the check, just left cash on the table and walked out. The night air was cold. He stood on the sidewalk, keys in hand, car at the curb, but he didn't move, not right away, because somewhere between the door and the street, he'd forgotten how to walk through a space and not own it. Inside, Alexis stood at the kitchen window, watched Brian's car pull away. Marcus was beside her. "You okay?" She didn't answer immediately, just watched the taillights disappear, then turned back toward the dining room. "Yeah." Her voice was steady, but when she reached for the tray on the counter, her hand paused. Just for a second, just long enough to steady itself. Then she picked it up and walked back out. The article dropped Monday morning. Not a tweet, not a thread. A full investigative piece in a business publication Brian had been featured in twice before. When power becomes performance, the cost of unchecked authority in corporate culture. His name wasn't in the title, but his face was in the photo, a still frame from the video. Him pouring the wine. Her standing there. The caption, "Viral incident raises questions about workplace dynamics and executive accountability." Brian read it 3 times. The article wasn't inflammatory, wasn't accusatory. It was measured, thoughtful, researched. Quotes from workplace experts, statistics about power imbalances, references to other incidents where executives had been quietly replaced, and buried halfway through, a single line. Representatives for Brian Hastings declined to comment. He'd never been contacted. They'd written the article without him. By noon, the article had been shared 12,000 times. By the next morning, his assistant knocked. She didn't come in, just stood in the doorway. "The board wants to see you." Her tone was different. Careful, like she was addressing someone whose authority she could no longer assume. The meeting was Thursday. Brian arrived 15 minutes early. Sat in the waiting area outside the conference room. He'd been on this floor 100 times, had closed deals in that room, but sitting there now, an executive he'd hired 2 years ago walked past, glanced at him, nodded once, then kept walking. No stop, no conversation, no acknowledgement beyond the minimum. When the door opened, the board chair gestured him inside. No handshake. "Come in." 7 people sat around the table. All of them looked at him when he entered. None of them stood. Brian sat. The chair scraped, loud in the silence. Margaret, the board chair, had her hands folded on the table. A leather portfolio sat in front of her, closed. She didn't open it, didn't lean back, just sat there. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 15. No one opened a laptop. No one adjusted papers. They just looked at him, not with hostility, with the careful neutrality of people who'd already made a decision and were now going through procedure. Margaret spoke. "Brian." A pause. "I'm sure you know why we've asked you here." He didn't answer. Wasn't sure if he was supposed to. "The video, the article, the response." She didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. "We've received inquiries from 3 major investors. 2 clients have requested meetings to discuss leadership. Our PR team has fielded over 50 media requests in 4 days." Brian kept his face neutral. "What do you want me to do?" Margaret's expression didn't change. "Issue a statement. Acknowledge what happened. Take responsibility." Brian's jaw tightened. It was a private interaction. It was recorded, out of context. Margaret didn't blink. "Brian." Her voice was quiet, almost kind. "Context doesn't change what people saw." The CFO shifted. The leather creaked, but he didn't speak. No one did. The head of PR had her pen poised over a notepad. Not writing, not moving, just waiting. Brian looked around the table. 7 faces. He'd known most of them for years, had dinners with some, golfed with others. But sitting here now, they looked at him the way strangers look at someone in a waiting room. Present, polite, distant. "And if I don't issue a statement," Margaret's hands didn't move, "then we'll need to consider whether your continued role as CEO aligns with the company's best interests." No emphasis, no anger, just process. Someone at the end of the table cleared their throat. Soft, brief. Margaret didn't look away from Brian. "We'll need an answer by Monday." She stood. Everyone else remained seated. The meeting was over. Brian stood, turned toward the door. No one said his name as he left. Brian sat in his car in the parking garage. Engine off. For 30 years he'd walked into rooms and changed them. Shifted attention, directed outcomes, set terms. And now he was the subject being discussed, the variable being calculated, the risk being managed. That night, Brian searched Alexis's name, found nothing. No statement, no interview, No presence at all. While his name was everywhere, hers was nowhere, and somehow, her absence felt more deliberate than anything he could have done. Brian closed the laptop, sat in the dark of his office. The city stretched out below. Lights in perfect rows, everything exactly where it was supposed to be, except him. He stared at his reflection in the black glass, and for the first time, couldn't remember what he'd looked like before all of this started. Alexis didn't see the board meeting, didn't read about it, but she knew. Monday afternoon, a corporate lunch reservation was cancelled. 20 people, booked 3 weeks ago. Marcus mentioned it while she was refilling ketchup bottles. They just said plans changed, but they both knew what that meant. Someone didn't want to be seen here, not while her face was still associated with this place. By Wednesday, 2 more reservations had been quietly moved. Not cancelled. Moved to other restaurants, places where the staff hadn't been on the news. The owner called a meeting Thursday morning, all front-of-house staff, 10 minutes before opening. He stood at the front of the dining room, hands in his pockets. We've seen a slight dip in reservations this week. Nothing dramatic, but noticeable. He paused. I'm not blaming anyone. What happened wasn't anyone's fault, but we're in a delicate position right now. His eyes drifted toward Alexis, briefly, then away. We'll get through this, but it might take time. No one said anything. The meeting ended 2 minutes later. Alexis finished her shift in silence, cleared tables, smiled at guests, moved through the space like always. When she clocked out, Marcus stopped her near the back door. You okay? Yeah. If you need to take some time off, I don't. Her voice was calm, steady, but her hand tightened on the strap of her bag. Marcus watched her, then nodded. All right. She walked out into the parking lot. Sat in her car, didn't start the engine. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. You holding up okay? Alexis stared at it, typed, yeah, thanks for checking. Another buzz. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Alexis set the phone down, looked out at the empty lot. She'd thought winning would feel different, thought there'd be a moment where everything shifted clearly, where she'd know it was over, but it wasn't over. Brian was losing his position, his reputation, his control, and she was still here. Still working, still watching reservations disappear because people didn't want to eat where something uncomfortable had happened. The silence she'd used as a weapon had worked, but it hadn't protected her from the aftermath. Friday night, Alexis served a table near the window. 4 people, well-dressed, polite. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and expensive jewelry, watched her as she set down drinks. Excuse me. Aren't you? Alexis met her eyes. Yes, the woman blinked. I just wanted to say, what happened to you was unacceptable. I'm glad people are finally talking about this. Alexis's expression didn't change. Thank you, the woman smiled, turned back to her table. Alexis walked away, but halfway to the kitchen she stopped. Stood there, because that woman, well-meaning, sympathetic, had no idea that Alexis hadn't asked to be a symbol, hadn't asked to be the face of workplace dignity or whatever narrative people were building around her. She'd just been standing there, doing her job, and now she was something else, something she hadn't chosen. That night, Alexis drove home in silence, parked in front of her apartment. Sat there. Her phone buzzed. Another check-in. She didn't open it, just stared at the dark screen. She'd won. But winning didn't mean she got to go back to who she was before. It just meant everyone else had to adjust to who she'd become, and she still didn't know who that was. Inside, Alexis set her keys on the counter, poured a glass of water, stood at the window looking out at the street. A car passed. Then another. Everything moving forward. She thought about Brian, wondered if he was sitting in his office right now, staring at his own reflection, trying to figure out what came next, wondered if he understood yet that neither of them had won. They'd just both lost different things. Alexis finished the water, set the glass down, and for the first time since the video went viral, she let herself feel tired, not physically, not emotionally, just tired of carrying something that had never been hers to carry. She sat on the couch, pulled a blanket over her legs, stared at the ceiling, waiting for something she couldn't name. Brian didn't plan to go back, but Saturday afternoon he found himself driving past the restaurant. He kept driving, made it 3 blocks before he turned around. He parked across the street, sat in his car, engine running. Through the windows he could see the dining room, tables occupied, staff moving efficiently, like nothing had happened. He watched for 15 minutes. Then he saw her. Alexis emerged from the kitchen, tray balanced, posture straight. She moved to a table, set down plates, smiled at a guest. From this distance, she looked exactly the same, except She wasn't. She was everywhere now, and he was nowhere. Brian turned off the engine, got out, crossed the street, pushed open the door. The host looked up, young, polite. "Good afternoon. Table for one? I'm here to see someone." The host's politeness flickered. "If you're not dining, I just need 5 minutes." The host glanced toward the kitchen. "Who are you here to see?" "Alexis." The host's expression changed. Not hostile, just aware. "Wait here." He disappeared into the back. Brian stood in the entryway. Around him the restaurant continued. Conversations, silverware, normalcy. No one looked at him. 60 seconds passed, then 90. The kitchen door opened. But it wasn't Alexis, it was Marcus. He walked toward Brian, stopped a few feet away. "She doesn't want to talk to you. I know what you need, but she doesn't owe you that." Something tightened in Brian's chest. 5 minutes. Marcus studied him. "You really don't get it, do you?" "Get what?" "That you already took enough." The words hung in the air, not shouted, just stated. Brian opened his mouth, couldn't respond. Marcus tilted his head. "You want closure. You want to explain. You want her to hear your side so you can feel like you did something." He paused. "But she's not a step in your process. She's not here to make you feel better about what you did." Brian's jaw tightened. "I'm not asking her to forgive me." "Then what are you asking for?" Silence, because Brian didn't know. He'd driven here without a plan, without knowing what would happen. He just needed to see her. Marcus watched him, then shook his head. "You should go." Brian stood there for 3 seconds, then turned, walked out. He crossed the street, got back in his car, sat there, hands on the wheel, engine off, and for the first time since this started, he felt something that wasn't doubt or frustration. He felt shame, real, undeniable, not because of what people thought, not because of what he'd lost, but because Marcus was right. He'd come here for himself, not for her. Even now, he'd still been trying to take something he hadn't earned. Inside, Alexis stood near the kitchen window. She'd seen him park, seen him walk to the door. Marcus had asked if she wanted to talk to him. She'd said no without hesitation. But watching him sit in his car now, motionless, she felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just emptiness. This was it, the moment he came back, tried to fix it, and she'd said no, and it had changed nothing. Marcus appeared beside her. "You okay?" "Yeah," but her voice was quieter. "You want me to ask him to leave?" She shook her head. "He'll leave on his own." They stood in silence. Then Brian's car started, pulled away, disappeared. Alexis turned back toward the dining room, picked up her tray, walked out, smiled, took orders, refilled drinks, everything exactly as it had been, except it wasn't. Something had shifted, not healed, not resolved, just shifted. She'd refused him, and the world hadn't ended. She'd just said no and kept moving. That night, Alexis sat in her car, stared at the restaurant through the rearview mirror, thought about Brian in his car across the street, about Marcus's words. "She's not here to make you feel better," about the silence she'd used and the cost it had extracted. She didn't need him to apologize, didn't need him to understand, didn't need closure or any of the things people said she deserved. She just needed to decide what came next, for her, not for the video, not for anyone watching, just for her. Alexis started the car, pulled out, drove home, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe, not because it was over, but because she'd finally stopped waiting for it to be. Monday morning, Brian didn't go to the office. He called his assistant at 8. "Cancel everything today." A pause. "Sir, you have the board meeting. Cancel it. Tell them I'll send a statement by end of day." Another pause. Longer. "All right." The call ended. Brian sat at his kitchen table, coffee untouched, laptop closed. Outside, the city moved. Traffic. Construction. Life continuing, but in here, everything had stopped. By noon, he'd written the statement. 3 drafts, each shorter than the last. The final version was 2 paragraphs. No excuses, no context, no explanation, just acknowledgement and resignation. He read it once more, sent it to the board, closed the laptop. The news broke by 3 p.m. Tech CEO steps down following viral incident. His phone started ringing. Colleagues, investors, people who hadn't spoken to him in weeks. He didn't answer, just turned it off, set it face down on the table, and for the first time in 30 years, he had nowhere to be. No meeting, no call, no decision requiring his input. He was just here, unemployed, irrelevant. That evening, Brian stood at the window. The city stretched below, lights coming on as dusk settled. Somewhere down there, people were having dinner, closing deals, making plans, living lives that had nothing to do with him. He thought about Alexis, wondered if she'd seen the news, wondered if it mattered to her at all. Probably not. She'd already moved on, while he was still here, trying to figure out what moving on meant. Brian turned from the window, walked to the kitchen, poured the cold coffee down the sink, then did something he hadn't done in years. He called his sister. She answered on the third ring. "Brian," her voice was careful. They hadn't spoken in months. "Hey," a pause. "I saw the news." "Yeah. Are you okay?" Brian opened his mouth, closed it. "I don't know." His sister was quiet. Then, "Do you want to come stay with us for a while? The kids would love to see you." Brian hadn't seen his niece and nephew in over a year. Hadn't made time. "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing. You're family." The word hung in the air. Family. Something he'd had all along but hadn't thought to value. "Okay, I'll come." His sister exhaled. Relief. "Good. Come whenever you're ready." The call ended. Brian stood in the kitchen, and for the first time in weeks, he felt something that wasn't shame or regret. He felt human-sized. Across the city, Alexis finished her shift. She'd seen the news during her break, read the headline, skimmed the article, put her phone away and went back to work. Sarah had found her later. "Did you see?" "Yeah." "How do you feel?" Alexis paused. "I don't know yet." And that was true. She didn't feel victorious, didn't feel vindicated, just tired. That night, Alexis sat on her couch, TV off, phone face down beside her. 3 calls from reporters, 7 texts from people asking if she wanted to tell her story. She'd ignored all of them because her story wasn't theirs to tell. She'd stood there, he'd poured wine on her, he'd lost his job, and now it was over. Except it wasn't, because she still didn't know who she was supposed to be after all of this. The woman in the video? The symbol people projected onto? Or just Alexis? She pulled the blanket tighter, stared at the ceiling. Maybe she didn't need to know yet. Maybe it was okay to just exist in the uncertainty for a while, to let herself be undefined, to stop performing for an audience that would move on eventually anyway. Alexis closed her eyes, let herself sink into the couch, and for the first time since all of this started, she let herself rest. Not because it was over, but because she'd finally given herself permission to stop fighting, to stop being anything other than exactly where she was. Somewhere across the city, Brian packed a bag. Somewhere in that same city, Alexis fell asleep on her couch. 2 people who'd never meet again. 2 lives permanently altered by 30 seconds. Neither could take back. One had lost everything he'd built. One had gained a visibility she'd never wanted. And both were learning the same lesson in different ways. That justice doesn't erase what happened. It just forces you to live with it differently. The restaurant opened the next morning. Reservations slowly returned. The video continued circulating, but less frequently. The news cycle moved on. And life, stubborn, relentless, indifferent, continued. Some stories don't end when you expect them to. This one won't either. What happened wasn't just about wine or power. It was about invisible lines crossed without permission, about silence, and about the cost of speaking. If this story made you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is the point. Real justice isn't clean. Real consequences don't feel like closure. If this made you question something you thought you understood, subscribe and turn on notifications. Leave a comment. Not to judge, but to reflect. Some stories aren't meant to comfort you. They're meant to stay with you. Thanks for watching.